Alright, what's going on guys? In this video, I'll be showing you how to upgrade the Jace Ingenious Mind-Mage Planeswalker Deck. As always, keep in mind that this deck isn't intended to be a Tier 1 GP winning competitive deck. If you want that, consider checking out the latest tournament results. What we'll be doing is upgrading this deck card by card, sticking to this deck's themes, and getting as much power out of it as we can. We'll also be doing it on a budget, as we will not exceed the deck's original MSRP price. So if you bought this deck and didn't like it, maybe you're thinking about buying another Planeswalker deck, hang on. For that same price, we can upgrade this deck and make it significantly more powerful than anything you can get out of the box, except for those spicy challenger decks, of course. So, what does the Jace Ingenious Mind-Mage deck do? Well, it's a tribal Merfolk deck. Yeah, I know, right? You probably wouldn't have guessed that before buying the thing because the box doesn't really indicate that, but it uses cards like Kumena's Speaker, Vineshaper Mystic, and Herald of the Secret Streams to flood the board with Merfolk and then make them bigger with +1/+1 counters. The deck's unique cards, the cards you can only get if you buy this deck, are Jace himself, along with Jace's Sentinel, and Grasping Current. Jace doesn't really have any synergy in this deck. I make it a point not to take out the original Planeswalker when I do these videos, but honestly, he's just a complete waste of a slot. There's nothing Merfolk related about his abilities, unfortunately. Jace's Sentinel, on the other hand, is a Merfolk that can become a 2/3 unblockable for 2 mana, which is okay, and Grasping Current can bounce a couple creatures, but it's a little bit expensive and clunky for my tastes. Fortunately, despite these cards not being all that great, the rest of the deck isn't bad. I mean, of the 4 tribes of Ixalan, Merfolk might be the most competitive. So if you bought this deck, you've got a pretty good start of a decent deck. We just need to make a few changes. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is take out Headwater Sentries and replace them with Merfolk Mistbinder. The Sentries are terrible. A 4 mana 2/5 with no abilities. Ugh, it's bad. The Mistbinders are an obvious improvement. They pump up all of our Merfolk, giving all of them +1/+1 and allowing us to swing pretty hard at our opponent very quickly. That's what we want, a fast, aggressive tribal Merfolk deck, and Merfolk Mistbinder is definitely better at doing that than the Headwater Sentries, which are just terrible. Next up, we'll be taking out 2 Air Elementals in favor of 2 more Merfolk Mistbinders. Air Elemental is a classic, and I really liked the card when I was new to the game, but it hasn't held up well. I mean, compare it to Glorybringer, for example. Yeah, that's strictly better than the Air Elementals, that's for sure. They're also not Merfolk, so let's toss those things out and get in a couple more of these Merfolk Lords, shall we? Next up, we'll be taking out 2 Jungle Delvers for 2 Kumena's Speakers. Now, important thing to remember is that we want to go really fast. While it's great that the Delver is a 1-drop, and it does have late game potential, it doesn't start becoming good until after turn 4, and then we have to sink all of our mana into it every single turn. I'd rather just play a Kumena's Speaker, get a 2/2 for 1, and start swinging at my opponent's head right away. That's what we're looking to do with this deck, so this will make the deck much faster and much more consistent. We're also going to be taking out one of the rares, Fleet Swallower, for an extra copy of a River Herald's Boon. Now, I know some people aren't going to like this because the Fleet Swallower is super fun and spicy, but look at it this way. You still own the card, and if you want, you could build an entire deck around it. It seems kind of silly and janky and fun, maybe, but this deck, however, wants to flood the board with Merfolk and kill the opponent super quick. So if we want this deck to be as good as possible, let's take out the Fleet Swallower and find a place for it in another deck, right? Anyway, River Herald's Boon can create massive swings in the game, putting out 2 +1/+1 counters for 2 mana. It can take your opponent by surprise, especially if you play it as a combat trick. So it's just a great card. It allows us to put, more damage out faster, and that's what we're looking to do. So next up, we're going to take out 2 Jade Guardians and replace them with 2 Silvergill Adepts. Again, the Guardians are too slow. 4 mana for 3 power is not what we want to do with this deck. It's too slow, it's too clunky. Silvergill Adept not only has a better cost to power ratio, but lets us draw into more gas. This card is even played in competitive Merfolk decks in the modern format, so clearly, yes, we want this in our standard deck for sure. And next up, we're going to take out 2 Jace's Sentinels for 2 more of these Silvergill Adepts. The Sentinels are almost good in theory. A 2 mana 2/3 unblockable is actually exactly what we want out of this deck. The problem is it can't be a 2/3 until Jace is out, and he costs 6 mana. So a 2 mana 2/3 unblockable on turn 7, well, that's not what we're doing. It's not that great. So again, the Silvergill Adepts are pretty sweet. 2 mana, 2 power, draw a card, fantastic. They're a clear improvement over the Sentinels for sure. Moving on, we're going to take out 2 Deeproot Warriors in favor of 2 Merfolk Branchwalkers. So the Deeproot Warriors are okay, a 2 mana 2/2 that gets bigger if it's blocked. The issue is they're only good when they aren't dealing damage to the opponent. Otherwise, they're just 2 mana 2/2s, so nothing super exciting. The Branchwalkers, on the other hand, get to explore, so they can be a 3/2 for 2, which is fantastic. And they also let us filter our draws a bit. If we have a land on top, we get to draw it, so we have a better chance of drawing into more gas the next turn. Or else, it's a 3/2, and we get to basically scry the top of our deck when we hit a non-land with it. So, it's pretty fantastic. Being able to have a 2 mana 3/2 with a scry effect is great. And having a 2 mana 2/1 that lets us draw through a dead land is also fantastic. So, yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. It's kind of perfect for this deck. And you usually don't get that kind of an effect in an aggro deck, so that's pretty cool. Finally, we're going back to the Sentinels. We're going to take out the final one for another one of these Branchwalkers. For all the same reasons, the Sentinel is too slow, and the Branchwalker is just kind of fantastic, so yeah, enough said. Definitely Branchwalkers over Sentinels for sure. Now, before we move on, let me say that we are about to take out some lands, but I need to be clear about something. An aggro deck doesn't need a ton of lands, but it's very important that you don't start stripping lands out of your deck until you have removed all of the expensive cards. You're going to get mana screwed all the time if you don't. So don't pull these lands out until you've taken out stuff like Air Elemental, Headwater Sentries, Fleet Swallower, Jade Guardian, stuff like that. We don't want to be mana screwed, so make sure you take out the expensive stuff, and then we'll have a much lower mana curve, which will allow us to play less lands, which in turn will allow us to draw into more gas more often, which is what you want out of an aggro deck. So just to keep that in mind, please. So, for an aggro deck, this thing has way too many lands, so we're going to cut 2 islands for 2 Mist-Cloaked Heralds. The Heralds are pretty sweet because they're unblockable, so we can dump all of our +1/+1 counters on them and chip away at our opponent's life total in increasingly large chunks. They're kind of fantastic, and there's some more spiciness with these in a little bit. We'll get to that. But moving on, and for the same reason, we're going to be taking out 2 forests for 2 more of these Mist-Cloaked Heralds. And again, remember, don't pull out 4 lands for 4 1-drops until you've taken out the expensive stuff. But by doing this, by taking out these 4 lands and putting in these Mist-Cloaked Heralds, we're going to have less and less of those 4 mana hands or 5 mana. 5 lands in your hand, you basically lose with an aggro deck. You don't want that many lands. We want 2 to 3 most of the time. We want to be able to see 2 lands in our hand and be okay with that. And that's kind of the idea behind an aggro deck, is that less lands are good because we want a higher ratio of gas or, threats. That's why we're doing this. We want less lands, more threats. I have one final creature to change, and that's Tempest Caller. I want to replace that with Seafloor Oracle. Now, I will say that the Tempest Caller sounds pretty sweet in theory. Imagine the battlefield is locked up. You and your opponent are close to death, but neither of you can attack, right? You've got this gummed up battlefield and no one can get through. So you windmill slam a Tempest Caller in play, tap all of your opponent's creatures, and swing for the win. It's glorious, right? That sounds fantastic. The problem is, it's also very situational. It'll definitely happen from time to time. You know, you'll have those glorious, crazy moments where you throw a Tempest Caller in play and just win the game. But there's also lots of times where it's just going to be like, Tempest Caller doesn't do much here. Seafloor Oracle, on the other hand, while it can't have those really spicy, game-winning plays, what it does do is it refills your hand once your aggro deck has gassed out, and that is super important, and it comes into play right at the point where you want it. It's at the top of the curve, 4 mana, you're flooding the board, you're running out of cards, you can play a Seafloor Oracle and start rebuilding your hand and flood the battlefield even more. That's what you want to do. So it's not as exciting, but it's way, way more consistent. It'll do that every single time, and it's really good with those Mistcloaked Heralds that we talked about earlier. Mistcloaked Heralds that are unblockable with Seafloor Oracle. It's just free cards every single turn, which is just great. So I like it more than the Tempest Caller, even if it's less, explosive. It's going to win you games. It's going to win a lot of them. If you play it on turn, like 5 or 6 when you're starting to gas out, but you have a Mistcloaked Herald in play or something like that, and you're drawing an extra card every turn, that's going to, push you over the top in a lot of games. So I love it. And finally, I want to take out these Grasping Currents and replace them with some kind of a counterspell, like Essence Scatter or Spell Pierce. I'd rather have Spell Pierce because I want a counterspell for board sweepers. Things like Fumigate and Settle the Wreckage. Those are devastating against a deck like this. A tribal aggro deck needs to have a lot of its tribe mates in play. You need to go wide, and you kind of just lose if your opponent has a board sweeper. So having a couple of answers for those is nice. So I would go with Spell Pierce. Spell Pierce is fantastic. Maybe like a Negate or something as well. Though I like Spell Pierce because it costs less, because we are an aggro deck. So we're going to be wanting to spend all of our mana every turn. We want to play bigger and bigger threats. We want to play them every single turn. So holding up mana for counter spells is kind of unintuitive and counterproductive. So having Spell Pierce, even though it's not quite as consistent, it means we don't have to leave up as much mana, and that's kind of great. It means we can be aggressive, but still have an answer for like a turn 5 Fumigate, something like that. So yeah, I'm a fan of that for sure. So that's it, guys. That's all of our upgrades. If you want to take this even further with some cards that were too expensive for our budget in this video, consider things like Kumena, Deeproot Elite, and Jadelight Ranger. All of these are pretty great, but they're too expensive for us. But man, that Deeproot Elite looks painful, am I right? You could also try Kapala. It looks really, really good, especially if your metagame is filled with a lot of creature control and targeted removal, lots of black and red maybe. So definitely consider that. If you're having trouble with, creature removal spells, looks fantastic, but again, it does come at a price. Also note that if you want to improve the mana base, dual lands and unclaimed territory are the way to go, though as always, those are a little bit expensive, so be aware of that, but here they are, something to consider. Anyway, that's it, guys. That is the deck. While we aren't quite in tier 1 competitive territory, we actually have a pretty sweet deck, and we're getting close to decks that actually have top 8'd major tournaments. If you want to see those decks, I will leave links in the description. They are a little bit different, and they are a whole lot more expensive, but we're getting there. We're pretty close, especially for as little money as we've spent. We've spent this deck's MSRP to get it here, and it's pretty sweet. It's very aggressive. It's definitely, without question, significantly more powerful than what the deck was in the box. I mean, Headwater Sentries, really? Don't like it. So, compared to what you bought initially, this is going to be way more consistent. It's going to be way more powerful. It's going to win you way, way more games. And if you want to take it even further, then again, there will be links in the description to tier 1 competitive versions, or at least the closest to tier 1. We'll say the most competitive Merfolk decks. You can find those in the description. So there you go, guys. Right, well, anyway, I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, a like is always appreciated. Also, check out the channel if you haven't, as I do upload regularly. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.